come back, loop around to the beginning a little bit here. All right, so welcome to the October meeting of the Red River chapter of the Arkansas Archeological Society. Take two. So I'm Carl Drexler. I'm the acting secretary treasurer for the chapter, and tonight's speaker. This talk tonight is going to be a little bit of an update on research done focusing on Locksburg Mounds since the fall of last year. And so we'll start in. I'll give you a little bit of a backstory about the site, tell you a little bit about how we're reconstructing some of the relic hunting history of the place, and then working through some of the stuff we've been doing with known collections attributed to the site, and then we'll close by talking about the plans for the next training program. So that training program is, let's see here. All right. So the training program is an event by the Arkansas Archeological Society. Now, the society is a statewide group for individuals who are interested in Arkansas archaeology. We're avocational archaeologists. Not all of our members are from Arkansas. We have people from Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Missouri, and even farther afield. But most of our folks are Arkansans, and we have, though we're a statewide organization, we have regional chapters. Ours are in, our chapter is located in Magnolia, or headquartered. And in normal years, we have meetings and speakers at Southern Arkansas University, which is in Magnolia. And when COVID's done, hope to see you all back for those. And while we have our chapter meetings around the state, we also meet twice a year for some larger events. And these are our major get-togethers. The first one is our annual conference, which we did online this year, and you can see the papers. I'll post the link in the description. You can pull those up and watch those. And then we also host what we call the annual training program. And this is a fairly long, it's 2.5 weeks, basically 2 weeks and 3 weekends of a summer session, traditionally held in June, where we teach people how to do archaeology and do it well. And in the process, we uncover some really important aspects of Arkansas's past. And this is a society event, but we do it in collaboration with my agency, which is called the Arkansas Archeological Survey. So the survey is a network of 10 research stations scattered across the state. Each is headed by a station archaeologist. I am the one for Southern Arkansas University down in the southwest part of the state. And traditionally, they're also supported by a station assistant. Now, 7 of those stations divide up Arkansas's 75 counties into territories, and we are tasked with doing research and outreach and public engagement within those territories. So mine encompasses all these counties in southwest Arkansas that are in brown, call it brown. And usually we do stuff throughout the year. This is a little bit of a weird year, obviously, in a lot of ways. But one of the big research and outreach programs that we do is working with the society on these training programs. So I'm going to tell you about the progress we made on this site called Locksburg Mounds, which is what we did the last training program on in 2019. Had intended to do the one for 2020 on, but we pushed that off to 2021. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we're thinking for next summer. So the 2019 training program, like I said, is at this place called Lockesburg Mounds. And this was the first systematic excavations at the site, which is important in that this is one of the biggest sites in what's called the Little River region, which is one of the least well understood archaeologically areas in the state. This work is helping to fill in some really important gaps in our understanding of Arkansas history. So let's talk a little bit about what Locksburg Mounds is. So it's in the Little River drainage right here. It's outlined in blue. This is the site itself. These dark dots are known Caddo sites around it, and then the yellow ones are Caddo mound sites, so scattered throughout the region. And you'll notice that Locksburg Mounds is right in the middle, and it's in the Cossatot River Valley, which is a tributary to the Little River. And rivers at the time are basically like highways, and so this is going to be a site that's going to be right on the main transportation network for this area. So it's an important site geographically, but it's also one of the largest sites in the Little River drainage. It is 10 mounds, mostly arranged in this sort of fishhook horseshoe shape around the big central Mound A, shown right here, which makes it one of 2 sites of that approximate size in the entire Little River drainage. Now, there's only one other, and it's actually slightly smaller than this one. So this was a very important site, and this would have been a place that people from up and down the Little River drainage would have come to for communal activities, for celebrations, for very important parts of the annual calendar. But in spite of its obvious importance, given its size, we actually know very little about the site. Until 2019, there had been no systematic excavations there, which begs the question of why. And there are a couple answers to that. One, it's frankly fairly remote from any of our research stations, so it's it's difficult to get to and sustain a research project on. But also, this is a site that has been fairly famously heavily disturbed. We know it was excavated on in the 1930s, and in the 1980s, it was really heavily disturbed by relic hunters. And this was a much more extensive kind of digging than we usually see on archaeological sites. For one, it was a multi-year effort. It was between 1980 and 1985 that this took place. And it involves some pretty heavy equipment. You can see they've got a Massey Ferguson backhoe stuck on the top of Mound A here. It's kind of rare to see that level of machinery brought in. And also, it was a big site. So there's frankly just opportunity to do much more widespread disturbance. The number of places to get dug into is huge because it's a gargantuan site. And after 5 years of really heavy digging, some archaeologists who had checked in on the progress but didn't have access to the site, so couldn't document what was going on, sort of assessed it by saying that it's been so heavily disturbed essentially that they're sort of unsure about what could actually be learned about the site in the wake of this disturbance. So our 2019 training program was an effort to start answering that question. What can we still get out of this thing? And we started off, we had a grand total of I think 75 people over the course of 2.5 weeks volunteered time to come out and learn how to do archaeology and salvage some information out of the site. So we focused on 2 areas. Our main excavation area was here on Mound A. What we did is we took a backhoe trench from the 1980s that was on this side of the mound, and then you can see the remnants of it here. That's this sort of dip, and basically we cut a long trench coming down the very edge of it to where we get just the tiniest fraction of the intact mound stratigraphy going along this edge of the excavation. And then we're able to document the backhoe disturbance on this face. And so that was, it took a while. It was a very complex thing, but it was a really important starting piece of work. And then over here on Mound E, we had our basic excavation class excavated the remains of the center of a caddo structure. You can see part of its hearth here, and found that you could actually see backhoe scrapes going through it as well. So in both places we got both intact deposits as well as great documentation of the disturbance done in the 20th century. Now, I've covered in greater detail what we found during that process in other talks. I don't really want to focus on that now. What I'd like to do instead is talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in spite of all the shutdowns that COVID has inflicted upon us. So we're going to focus on some new geophysical work at Mound A. We'll look at the oral history we've been doing with focused on relic hunting at the site. We've got a really neat artifact that we've been doing some research on out of existing museum collections, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what we're planning with the Arkansas Archeological Society 2021 training program. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with talking about some of the geophysics we've been doing on Mound A. This is a big platform mound. And while we excavated on the edge of Mound A, we haven't looked at the center or the top of the mound so far. We knew that this would be an important place within the full scope of the site. It's clearly the sort of center of the entire place, and we didn't want to go rushing into work there in 2019 because this was something we wanted to approach very deliberately. And the geophysics that we did this past winter is going to lay the groundwork for upcoming excavations. Now, why is Mound A so important? Well, it's in the center of the site, but it's a platform mound. And the platform mounds are really important places within these mound centers. They're typically constructed through successive layers, where they start off with a temple or other sort of major civic center that is, after a period of time, burned and capped with dirt, and then a new temple is built on top of it. And they typically you'll have several layers of construction done like this as the mound builds up. The photo is a version of this out in the open and nice and visible from Caddo Mound State Historic Site in Alto, Texas. And so our approach to getting a little deeper, both metaphorically and literally, into Mound A is going to lead with a geophysical survey. And so what do we mean by a geophysical survey? Well, in this case, we're using a machine called a radiometer. And we got four of them laid out here. This was at our work at Pea Ridge National Military Park in Benton County a couple years ago. And what these are basically instruments that measure very tiny fluctuations in magnetic fields. They're basically have two sensors per machine, and we walk them back and forth across the landscape, and they develop essentially a digital image seen from above of magnetic field strength instead of color data. And the really neat thing about it is that when you get the data processed, you can find stuff like this. And this is the footprint of Mound I at Locksburg. This is barely noticeable on the surface, but you can see the very nice round footprint of the mound. And we can map this out without having to dig anything. Now, this is collected under the best circumstances. This is flat terrain, this is open grassy ground cover, and it's easy to walk this data because you have to walk back and forth at both a very set pace and on very straight lines. And so this was easy to collect, and the data looks really nice. Another reason we're kind of slow to do this on Mound A was that We don't have those conditions. The relic hunters who were there in the 1980s left the pits they dug open. Apparently the landowner was concerned about the safety of the cattle, so the open field pits were all refilled, but the pits on the big mound where the cattle did not go were not similarly backfilled. And so you can actually still see them today. This is our Fiona Taylor, our former station assistant here in Magnolia, who's fairly tall, and she's shoulder to head deep in one of these pits. And then this here is the backdirt pile of the displaced material. And so it's really hard to walk at a set pace and a straight line across that. But nevertheless, went out in March, did my best to lay out some straight baselines through some, frankly, still fairly dense foliage, and then did my level best to collect data with a radiometer systematically. And this was a lot of running very hard uphill to try to keep the sensor where it needed to be to collect things accurately. But the topography and the vegetation, frankly, did not make that difficult. But it was important to do this, not only because it would give us a look at the mound's immediate subsurface deposits, but also one of our partners in this effort has been the Caddo Nation in Oklahoma, and they have been generally supportive of what we're doing and request that we take steps to identify potential grave locations so we don't disturb them. And so this is one of the ways that we honor that request. And frankly, burials in big platform mounds are kind of rare, but it's important to look anyway, and so now we have that data together. And so with the data assembled, honestly, I freely admit, this is, a little ugly. You can see some of this striping here is from the misalignments, which I think are fairly unavoidable given the difficulty of walking across this terrain. But when we look at some of these areas, we know that the areas highlighted in red here are some of those relic hunter pits from the 1980s. You can see that there's some correspondence of data anomalies that appear to track along with where those diggers were. But there's a couple other things going on here that might be interesting to investigate archaeologically. And so we've got some other data anomalies that don't seem to be as heavily associated with clear disturbance on the top. So these are going to be areas that we will be looking at more thoroughly through excavation. And I'm also, I'm interested in these areas here in particular because these are areas of high magnetic signature, and one of the things that we were trying to do with this site is locate the place where our former colleague, Dr. Dan Wolfman, collected what's called an archaeomagnetic sample from the site in 1986. This is a technique used with magnetized soil to essentially date when the burning took place. And this would help us, if we can figure out where exactly his sample was taken from, that would be an important addition to what we know about the site. And all right, so we'll be literally digging into this a little more as we get into our next training program, working basically in the pits that were left open by the relic hunters, which brings us to our next effort, which is basically trying to do some oral history work with the folks who are involved in the relic hunting back in the 1980s to increase our documentation and understanding of what took place. So, to be clear, this was a very large-scale effort, but it was legal. The relic hunters had signed out a lease that they paid the landowner for. Their digging was done for commercial purposes, and and was within the bounds of the law at the time. Unfortunately, though, any notes or photographs that were collected, I haven't seen them, and they haven't been published, which hinders our ability to understand the site and document what was found there. And just as a refresher, since we mentioned this one before, one of the major sort of aspects of the recent history of Locksburg Mounds has been the 1980s relic hunting, which I should point out is not the first major period of disturbance there. It was actually dug very heavily in the 1930s as well. We don't know how extensively or what was found. Again, not a lot of documentation. But the 1980s was the other big period. And so our 2019 excavations started showing signs of this past digging, but we don't really have a map of where everything was, which when you're trying to interpret something this large, that's a really big limitation. And this was very frustrating up until a few months ago, when I happened upon a resource that's actually giving us a window into what was going on. And that is this thing called the National High Altitude Photography Program, which was a joint effort headed by the U.S. Geological Survey back in the 1980s. That was a multi-agency effort to collect nationwide aerial photography that was done at a standard resolution, standard elevation, without cloud cover for the entire United States. And so they collected two kinds of imagery. They collected a black and white set of aerial photos at 1 to 80,000 scale, and then a color infrared at an even larger scale, so 1 to 58,000. So this is had not seen this until it became available, I think, this past summer from USGS online. And all that data collection was done 1980 to 1989. And I got playing around with this data set in the lab and found that for Locksburg Mounds, the site area had been photographed in 1980, 1981, 1984, and 1985. And remember, the relic hunting that was going on started in 1980 and ended right around 1985. So I downloaded the imagery for those years and georegistered them in this program we have called ArcMap. And when we get closer in on the site, so this is a 1980 aerial imagery, and you can actually see these areas here where you have this stippling. This is a color infrared image, so the red is actually basically plant cover. And so you have all these areas where that plant covers come off, and you've got these little circles are all potholes from the relic hunters. And you also have a long trench cut across here. And what this is you have the potholes are looking for, essentially, they're working in the flats, they're looking for cemeteries. And so they know cemeteries are often places where you find nice pots and other artifacts. And so this is how they do their business. But we can see in this 1981 image the extent of the potholing on the site. You actually see the different areas where they're working. The 1981 image, again, the red should be green, but we have, instead of sort of extensive small areas, we have some fairly large areas of disturbance coming up along those mounds. So this is going to be Mound G here, and this is the area around Mound I out here in the middle. Now, 1982 and 1983 we don't have imagery for, but when we come back in 1984, you can see we've got, there's been more stuff done here. We've got, looks like disturbance down south of the road here. And then we've got some really long stripes of disturbed dirt coming along up in here. And it's important to note that the fields surrounding the site don't have any similar disturbance to them. So I don't think this is agricultural. I think this is the relic hunters out doing work. And by 1985, you see there's, this could be agricultural, but it looks like there's not a lot of fresh digging that's been done. And so I think this is evidence that this is the work has been slowed down. We have from field notes from archaeologists who were visiting the site that they knew that the place was not being as heavily dug anymore. And I think we see that in the data here. So this is letting us starting to build a map of the areas that have been really highly impacted. And I showed you the radiometer data from Mound A before. When we looked at some of the radiometer data from the area around Mound E, we're actually starting to see some correspondence between anomalies in the data and the trenches that were cut by the relic hunters. And so the imagery doesn't necessarily always line up crisply, but you can see we've got two of those trenches that are cut sort of north-south, and we have these sort of long linear anomalies coming down in the geophysical data there. We've got another one that comes up under here, and I think this is it represented by this stripe. And so one of the things I'm working on right now is basically going through our radiometer data for other areas of the site and trying to make correspondences between anomalies like this and the 1980s data, so we know what it looks like in the field. And the 1985 image in particular is interesting as it shows how quickly the vegetation is rebounded once the digging stops. But in addition to being able to draw these parallels between the NHAP data and the stuff we've been collecting, I also frankly contacted some of the people that were involved in the relic hunting in the 1980s and asked them, is this you guys basically? And they very frankly said, yeah, this is what we're doing. This is that was us, and this is their business, and like I said, it was legal, and they were even generous enough to go out and do some oral histories with me of the site. And just a couple weeks ago, I actually got to walk around the site with a couple of one of the guys who was influential in that process, this guy right here, Sam Johnson from Caddo Mounds up in Murfreesboro. And he gave me a pretty good idea of where he dug and the kinds of stuff he was finding. So this is helping us build back some of the information about the different mounds on the site and what they're used for, and gives us an idea of what's been heavily disturbed and what's not. And that can all help shape our work going forward. All right, so additionally now, we've been doing a little bit of work with collections. I've got the artifacts from the 2019 training program out on the lab table under analysis, which that's going to be sort of more mass analysis. We'll get into that in later talks. I want to focus on one item in particular, though, because it's very rare. This did not come out of those excavations, but this was something that we were sort of working on in the summer of 2019, and we haven't really talked about it that much in connection with the site. And that is, why is this a blank slide? Okay, this is the head of a effigy from a wooden bowl that was attributed to the site. And so this came up as I was preparing for the 2019 training program. I was talking with a different relic hunter who's involved in the 1980s digging, and he mentioned that a wooden bowl from the site had been donated to the University of Arkansas Museum up in Fayetteville. So I checked with them, and they had it's still in the collection. I did not have it recorded as being associated with Locksburg, so we got that established. We now can make that association. And we've been looking a little more into both this effigy and sort of wooden bowls from Caddo sites in general. So significantly, there aren't very many wooden bowls attributed or documented as coming from Caddo sites at all. There are a couple from the Swiro site up in Oklahoma. There's one from the Spider Creek Bluff Shelter up in the Ozarks. And then there's this from Lockesburg Mounds I've been able to track down. I contacted Michael Hoffman, Dr. Michael Hoffman, who used to run the University of Arkansas Museum, was the one in charge of the museum when this was donated, and he forwarded me a copy of a paper that he gave at the Southeastern Archaeological Conference in 1992, which was basically a progress report on it. It didn't go much farther. Now, this is a really interesting piece of work. This was the paper, which is the only published, even semi-published thing on it. Was done by Michael and Margaret Hoffman jointly. And as we get more, get the story more and more sort of together, we find out that this vessel was one of as many as 5 attributed to the site, not just one. This was the only one that had vessel C, as it was called, is the only one that had an effigy on it. But as many as 5 from a burned structure in one of the mounds. They didn't have which mound it was from, but in their analysis, it concluded that the effigy faced inwards over the bowl. You note the large eye concavities here. Were probably fitted out with shell inlays at the time. Those have since gone. The effigy itself, as described, and as you can see, it has large triangular teeth, and the Hoffmans believe that the lack of whisker motifs and the general shape of the head indicated that this was representing a dog. Now, it should be noted that short muzzle effigies seen here have been interpreted in some other contexts as representing big cats. Dog effigies sometimes have longer snouts, but that's just another possibility. And while the Hoffman's work was really important in getting some information together about the site, they identify the context as simply one of the mounds. And their preliminary work had a couple extra things to puzzle out about it, and we've been working on that a little bit. So, further analysis of the vessel C effigy has been frankly hampered by the fragility of the find. Again, we don't get wooden bowls, wooden items in general from many Caddo sites, and this vessel C and the other ones recovered had been burned, so they're even more fragile. But we've been working with the U of A Museum and the staff, the survey staff of the coordinating office up in Fayetteville, and our plan is to 3D scan the item and then 3D print a version of it that would allow us to basically handle a proxy for the item instead of risking damage to the original. So that's in progress. And we're going to be looking a little more deeply at both the context of the find and the ethnographic information we have about wooden bowls and how the Caddos use them. Now, already from the conversations that we've had with relic hunters associated with the site, we've learned that the vessels came from Mound A. They're from the main platform mound on the site. They're uncovered in a burn layer in the main mound, which is a piece of information we did not have before, so it's great to have that. It also means that these are not from a burial context. So, showing them here and not showing you burial goods. Wouldn't do that if I thought they were. And there's a little bit of ethnographic information out there about how wooden bowls were used in cattle contexts. There's an 18th century account from Fray Isidro Felix de Espinosa. It was reported that wooden bowls were temple items used by the Caddos, which would certainly then be unsurprising that we were finding this in basically a temple mound, in Mound A. And in the same general region, but not strictly Caddo, 18th century missionary by the name of Paul de Roux, noted from the Tensa people in northeast Louisiana that wooden bowls were similarly restricted to use in temples. So this is, I think, a fascinating find, and one that I think underscores the importance of the site. And we're going to be working to pull together more and more information about this effigy in coming years. Now then, the training program in 2021 will be our next Arkansas Archeological Society major dig. And those interested can come and learn to dig. You join the society and get involved. It's a good time, frankly. I always enjoy seeing folks out there. But our plan for the next time we have the training program is going to focus on 3 areas. We're going to go to Mound A here, and we're going to be working closer to the center of the mound, digging like we did last time at the edges of the 1980s relic hunter pits, and basically cutting big profiles where you can see the construction sequence of the mound, but now in the center, not the margins of it. And so that'll be one of our major areas of effort. We'll also be going back to Mound E over here and exploring more thoroughly the footprint of that structure that we started on in 2019. And I also intend to go over here to Mound I, which I showed you the Radiometer data for earlier. And this is a really interesting spot because there clearly was a mound here, but it's not really visible on the surface anymore. And what I want to do with this is both, try to figure out what its purpose was, and also see if we can find debris from the relic hunters that dug into it. And is this a 1930s excavation that largely removed it from the surface, or is it some other period? It's a little bit of historical archaeology mixed in with all this pre-contact stuff. All right, so that's a basic plan. Now, the elephant in the room with all of this is the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And the training program is a ton of fun, but it does put lots of people working, living, eating, commuting, and traveling back and forth between site and lab and camp together for 2 weeks. So that's a lot of time and close proximity. And we're going to need to do this safely. And I want to let you know that I've been working with the coordinating office and the Society's executive committee to plan for this. Currently, we do intend to have the program, but we will be continuing to monitor the conditions as we get into the new year. This will be a little bit of an evolving thing. And we will work together to make sure that when it happens, it will be safe for people to be in field, lab, camp, and vehicles together. And to stay abreast of our planning efforts and the progress of that, keep an eye on field notes, the bulletin for the Arkansas Archeological Society. Look for emailed updates from Marilyn Knapp, our Society survey liaison. And also just keep an eye on the Society and the survey's Facebook pages and Twitter feeds for more information as it comes available. We'll get it to you as soon as we can. We're very eager to see everyone back out in the field, but just don't want to do it until we can do it safely. So I think we're going to wind it up there. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat window. You can email me at cdrexler@uark.edu at your convenience. Or you can also find my research station page on Facebook. And yeah, so thank you all for attending, and we'll be back next month with another speaker. So thanks, guys.